So what if the politicians you really just can't stand what if they aren't just horribly incompetent?
Right?
What if they're literally taking orders from like ancient corrupted cosmic middle managers? Because there's this deeply ingrained assumption, right? In
Mhm.
modern political discourse, we just assume that God handpicks every single leader to carry out this flawless divine plan.
Oh, absolutely.
Unless, of course, that leader belongs to the opposing political party, because in that case, their power is a cosmic mistake or stolen or just genuinely satanic.
Yeah, it's this incredibly convenient binary theology, but it totally falls apart under the slightest historical scrutiny.
Right.
Because subscribing to the idea that every political leader is directly appointed by heaven, it leaves you trying to explain a God who intentionally raised up some of the most horrific dictators in human history.
Exactly.
It forces you into a theological corner that most people, if they really think about it, do not want to inhabit.
Yeah, they really don't. So today's deep dive is into an April 2026 article that completely dismantles that whole simplistic framework. It's titled Thrones, Powers, and Principalities, A Better Theology of Politics. And it's written by Jamin Bradley.
Yeah, and he brings a really uniquely layered perspective to this,
He does. He's a pastor, a theologian, and notably a trained exorcist.
which is fascinating.
Right. So the mission today is to explore his alternative biblical framework for understanding political power. We're moving beyond, standard partisan cheerleading to uncover this sprawling, ancient cosmic drama involving spiritual powers, human leaders, and just the fundamental nature of earthly authority.
But before we go further into the actual mechanics of this cosmic drama, we really need to establish the ground rules here.
Yeah, good call.
Politics and religion are highly combustible elements. So to be explicitly clear to you listening,
Yep.
we are not taking any political sides today.
Nope.
We are not endorsing the left, the right, or any modern political viewpoint. Our objective is just to impartially report on Bradley's theological framework, analyzing how these ancient texts view the intersection of spiritual authority and human politics as, like, a complex system.
Without adopting a specific modern agenda.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand where human government even comes from in this framework, we have to rewind, right? We have to go back to the origin story of nations in the biblical narrative.
We do.
Where does this separation of humanity into distinct governed borders even begin?
So, according to Bradley, it traces back to the Tower of Babel.
Hmm.
And this requires a pretty major paradigm shift from how the story is typically absorbed in, popular culture.
Yeah, because usually Babel is presented as this really simplistic fable about people building a really tall brick tower just out of sheer arrogance.
Right. But the biblical writers, they frame Babel as a catastrophic origin story for human political division. Because humans had this direct, explicit mandate from God to spread out and populate the earth.
But they didn't do that.
No, they completely defied that order. They clustered together in one centralized location for a massive religious project.
And the structures they built, like the ziggurats in ancient Mesopotamia, they weren't just early skyscrapers.
Right, they were much more than that.
They were understood as portals or stairways. They were designed either to climb up into the divine realm or to pull the gods down to them. It was this like defiant attempt to centralize power and manipulate the divine.
Yeah, and God's response to this centralization is to scramble their languages.
Which introduces a natural, basically insurmountable communication barrier.
Exactly. And that forces the dispersion they initially refused. So as they divide by language, they form into the separate nations of the earth. But this is the key. The text indicates a massive corresponding event happening simultaneously in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, this detail from Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8, it completely reframes the whole narrative. Because the people at Babel essentially demanded to interact with lesser spiritual entities instead of the ultimate creator.
And God's response is, well, essentially to grant that request.
He just gives it to them.
He initiates a massive shift in the cosmic hierarchy. He delegates these newly formed nations to the oversight of other created spiritual beings.
It's a massive delegation of jurisdiction. And the Apostle Paul later categorizes these beings using terms like principalities and powers.
Yeah, and Bradley makes a critical theological distinction here that I think is often lost in modern translation.
Oh, about the false gods.
Yes, when ancient texts refer to false gods, they are not describing imaginary entities or mythical constructs or literal statues made of wood and stone.
No, they are actual created supernatural beings. The term false only applies to their status as objects of worship.
Right, they were never meant to be worshipped as supreme.
But they were granted genuine authority. Honestly, the best way I could conceptualize this framework was to think of it like a cosmic franchise model.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so you have the ultimate CEO at the top who establishes the overarching company, which is the underlying order of the universe, but the CEO chooses not to micromanage every single regional branch.
Right, they hire middle management.
Exactly. These little gods are given legitimate delegated authority to run their specific geopolitical regions.
And the intention behind this middle management was order. I mean, God is presented fundamentally as a God of order, not of chaos.
Yeah.
So these lesser gods were originally good entities. They were mandated to lead their respective nations using the exact same standards of justice and righteousness that the CEO would use.
They were supposed to be like perfect, invisible administrators of human flourishing.
Exactly.
But wait, if God specifically engineered this cosmic middle management structure to keep human societies running smoothly, why is human history such a chaotic, bloody mess? Like, what actually happens to these delegated administrators?
That is the big question. And Bradley directs us to the book of Daniel for this startling look behind the curtain of this management structure.
Yeah, this part is wild.
So Daniel is praying, right? He's waiting for a divine message. And an angel finally arrives to deliver it. But the angel explains that he was delayed for 21 days.
Which is a very specific detail.
It is. And the reason for the delay is that the angel was engaged in literal combat with a spiritual being identified as the Prince of Persia, just to break through and deliver the message.
And then the angel even casually mentions that once he's done talking to Daniel, he has to go back and fight the Prince of Greece.
Right. It implies that these geopolitical empires have direct, corresponding spiritual entities overseeing them.
It's a terrifying reality about the hierarchy. Somewhere along the timeline, the good beings who were endowed with this immense delegated power became thoroughly corrupted.
They completely abandoned the CEO's values. They stopped administering justice and started consolidating power, demanding worship, and basically fueling the oppressive empires of antiquity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because God doesn't just quietly fire them or let this slide. Bradley points to Psalm 82, which paints this incredibly tense, dramatic, cosmic courtroom scene.
Yeah, God summons these rogue middle managers, these corrupted lesser gods, into his court to stand trial for their mismanagement.
And the charges are just fascinating.
The charges leveled against them in this courtroom scene are incredibly specific, and they're grounded entirely in their governance. The indictment states they judged unjustly.
Right.
They are charged with actively supporting the wicked, ignoring the suffering, failing to uphold people's basic rights, and explicitly refusing to rescue the poor or deliver the oppressed from the hands of the powerful.
Wait, failing to rescue the poor and judging unjustly, those sound exactly like the failures of human politicians.
Totally.
I mean, you could read that exact list of charges in an op-ed about almost any modern corrupt government or failing institution today.
And that parallel is the absolute crux of Bradley's argument. The corruption in the spiritual realm is inextricably intertwined with the corruption in the earthly realm.
Right.
Because these spiritual beings failed so spectacularly in their mandate to uphold justice, God hands down a terminal sentence. Even though they are divine beings, God declares in Psalm 82 that their corruption has earned them mortality.
Which is shocking.
It is. One day, he will strip them of their power, and they will die like mortal men.
But that brings up a massive question of causality. Like, if God is the ultimate CEO and these middle managers are actively ruining the franchise right now, why wait for one day?
Right. Why not act now?
Yeah, why doesn't God just snap his fingers, fire them immediately, and install new management?
Well, it comes down to the mechanics of delegated authority. If a CEO bypasses every middle manager the moment they fail, the franchise model basically ceases to exist.
It just collapses into absolute micromanagement or a dictatorship.
Exactly. God's commitment to the structure of free will and delegated authority means allowing the natural consequences of that structure to play out. So the timeline of this cosmic drama requires a sentence to be pronounced long before the execution is actually carried out.
Giving human history room to operate within the framework of genuine autonomy.
Precisely.
But these invisible spiritual middle managers aren't down here physically sitting at mahogany desks, drafting unfair tax legislation or ordering police crackdowns. They cannot govern the physical world on their own.
And this introduces the most crucial distinction in Bradley's theology: the vital difference between the seat of power and the human occupant who sits in that seat.
Oh, this is so important.
We must remember the foundation here. God established the general seats of power, governments, rulerships, institutional authorities to maintain order in the physical world.
Because he's a God of order.
Right. However, he does not necessarily appoint the specific human beings who maneuver themselves into those seats.
And Bradley pulls a quote from the prophet Hosea to illustrate this disconnect perfectly. God says, "They made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew it not."
The human populations are choosing these leaders.
Yeah. And even in the rare historical instances where God does appoint a specific human to a seat of power, it is no guarantee of lifelong righteousness.
Right, like King Saul.
Exactly. The Old Testament figure of King Saul is the prime example. He was anointed and God appointed, but over time he became horribly, violently corrupt. The human occupant failed the seat.
It highlights a profound vulnerability engineered into the system. The gods of the spirit realm and the human leaders of the earthly realm essentially share the same seats of power.
Yeah.
To enact their dark will in the physical world, the corrupt spiritual gods must partner with the humans operating in the earthly realm.
Right.
So when you look at a nation and watch a human leader commit the exact same sins the gods were charged with in Psalm 82, ignoring the poor, judging unjustly, you are actually watching those corrupted principalities at work through our human political structures.
This makes perfect sense of the New Testament dynamic between Jesus and the Roman governor Pilate.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Jesus is standing trial, facing an unjust execution. And he looks directly at Pilate, the human occupant of the seat, and says, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above."
Which is a huge statement.
It is. Jesus acknowledges that the seat of authority Pilate occupies is legitimate. Government was established for order, but Pilate is completely abusing that God-given power out of political cowardice.
Yeah, the charges made against the ancient gods are the exact same charges you could make against Pilate for failing to protect an innocent man.
And when that dark partnership reaches its ultimate logical conclusion, when human rulers fully and willingly align their agendas with the oppressive motives of the spiritual realm, the Book of Revelation describes the resulting empire as a beastly marionette.
Right, the earthly government becomes an animated puppet of the sinister spiritual principalities.
But let's talk about the mechanics of this partnership, because beastly marionette evokes imagery of, like, politicians doing secret supernatural rituals in basements to contact the Prince of Persia.
Right, people always jump to the cinematic version.
Yeah, but I imagine the actual process of a human leader partnering with a corrupt god is far more mundane.
It is entirely mundane, which is what makes it so insidious. Partnering with a corrupt principality doesn't require a mystical ceremony. It requires yielding to greed. It requires prioritizing the survival of the institution over the dignity of the individual. It looks like accepting a campaign donation that compromises your values, or turning a blind eye to systemic poverty because fixing it is, politically inconvenient.
So the theology suggests that these everyday compromises of justice are the very strings by which the principalities manipulate human systems.
Exactly.
But wait, if there are supernatural beings pulling the strings of the institution, manipulating the system through these unseen forces, doesn't that render the human politician a victim?
I can see why you'd ask that.
I mean, it sounds like the ultimate excuse. A tyrannical leader could just shrug and say, "The Prince of Persia made me do it." Doesn't that let human leaders entirely off the hook for their bad behavior?
That is a trap many ancient and modern thinkers fall into. But Bradley clarifies the boundary of human autonomy here. Human powers are not demons.
Okay.
They are human beings operating in a highly spiritually charged space. The strings of the marionette are not permanently bolted to their limbs. The human must actively decide to accept the partnership.
So they still have a choice.
Absolutely. The human retains the free will to rule justly, to reject the greed, and to dismantle the systemic corruption if they choose to do so.
So the internal fortitude of the person in the seat becomes the ultimate defense mechanism against the principalities.
Yes. Politics is a profoundly complicated, morally gray space. It is incredibly difficult to navigate that space without compromise, which is why the fundamental character of the leader is paramount. Some leaders genuinely try to leverage that complex system for the benefit of the vulnerable. But unfortunately, there are those whose hearts and minds are eager to be weighed down by the gods. They crave the power, the prestige, and the control, so they willingly accept the partnership.
The autonomy, and therefore the ultimate responsibility, remains squarely on the shoulders of the human occupant.
Exactly.
What stands out to you so far? Because think about the implications of this framework for a second. We have God-appointed seats of power meant to maintain order.
Yeah.
We have rogue, spiritual middle managers actively trying to corrupt those seats from an unseen dimension.
Right.
And we have flawed human beings with complete free will deciding whether or not to become beastly marionettes just for the sake of political survival.
Yeah.
It is an intense, overlapping cosmic drama.
It really is.
But practically speaking, for someone living their life under this system, dealing with flawed humans sitting in spiritually corrupted seats of power, what is the prescribed response?
Well, the theology has to translate to practical action, right?
Yeah.
And Bradley uses the life of the Apostle Paul to illustrate the tension we live in. Paul taught that citizens should generally be obedient to empowered rulers.
Right, because of the underlying blueprint.
Yes, the ideal design is that those rulers sit in seats appointed for order, and they're supposed to support justice and human flourishing.
But the irony is incredibly thick, considering Paul wrote many of those letters instructing obedience while sitting unjustly in a jail cell.
Oh, 100%.
Put there by those exact same empowered rulers.
Yeah.
Paul wasn't a naive optimist writing philosophical theories from a comfortable academy. He knew the messy reality of politics. He understood that earthly authority does not automatically equate to goodness.
Paul lived that contradiction daily. Because human leaders so frequently choose to partner with corrupted gods rather than pursue justice, there must be a systemic counterforce built into the framework.
And what is that?
Bradley identifies this crucial counterforce as the prophetic voice. In this theology, God raises up prophets to engage and disrupt the corrupted system.
And the job of the prophet here isn't about, predicting the future with a crystal ball.
No, not at all.
Their job is to aggressively speak truth to power. Their mission operates almost like a spiritual extraction team. They march up to the throne or the Senate floor or the corporate boardroom to remind the human leader exactly why they were given that immense power in the first place.
Right.
They are trying to pull the human principalities out of the grasp of the spiritual principalities.
And Bradley's description of how this prophetic voice affects the general population is equally vital, because prophets aren't solely speaking for the benefit of the king or the president. They must speak up to shatter what Bradley calls the spiritual haze.
Spiritual haze.
Yeah. When a nation or an institution falls under the heavy influence of these corrupted lesser gods, a sort of collective hive mind takes over the citizenry.
Oh, wow. We see this all the time in modern psychology, even without the theological lens. It's groupthink. It's extreme partisanship. It's that institutional inertia where you walk into a toxic workplace and realize everyone just accepts the dysfunction as normal. The people inside the haze don't even realize they've been won over. They just accept injustice, cruelty, or corruption as, the way the game is played.
The prophet serves as the alarm clock, trying to wake up that hive mind. And Bradley points out something visceral about the internal burden of the prophet. Even if absolutely no one listens, even if the ruler ignores them and the hive mind mocks them, the prophets must speak.
They have to.
Staying silent in the face of that spiritual corruption, holding the truth inside, will literally make them sick. They are compelled to articulate the truth simply to contest the spiritual dominion hanging over the area.
It's a heavy burden, but a deeply necessary one for the survival of any just society. So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
How does it apply?
You might be thinking you aren't a king, a president, or a CEO holding a massive geopolitical seat of power. But Bradley makes a compelling point to close out his framework. He reminds the reader that all human beings are made in the image of God.
Right.
Because of that divine imprint, every single one of us possesses natural power and dominion over the earth in our own specific, localized spheres.
You occupy a seat of power. It might be within your family dynamic, your local community board, your classroom, or your workplace.
The scale is different, but the mechanics of the authority remain identical.
They really do.
And just like those human political leaders, we all share the exact same tendency to abuse our power. We all possess a power-hungry heart. Power is delegated to us. We are allowed to wield it. And far too often, we abuse it to control or oppress the small patch of earth we manage. But because you possess autonomy, you can actively engage in this cosmic spiritual warfare without ever running for office. You do it by making righteous, just decisions in your everyday life. You do it by choosing to be the prophetic voice that points out dysfunction and breaks the spiritual haze in your own sphere of influence.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Bradley's theology offers a profound synthesis of the mystical and the highly practical.
It really does.
Seats of power exist simultaneously in the spiritual and natural realms. They were engineered with a divine purpose to carry out goodness, justice, and order. Yet they remain deeply vulnerable.
Very vulnerable.
They're consistently abused by both the supernatural entities and the humans who occupy them, mirroring how we all struggle to manage the natural power allotted to us without causing harm. If we refuse to engage prophetically, if we simply yield to the inertia of those power-hungry systems, the natural devastating consequences will continue to define our nations.
It fundamentally changes the lens through which you view the evening news or even office politics. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. As you go about your week, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over, building on everything we've just explored.
Okay.
If these earthly institutions and governments are permanent fixtures meant for order, but they are constantly interacting with corrupted spiritual entities and flawed human beings over centuries, do those institutions eventually develop their own ingrained spiritual gravity? Does a system like a specific government seat, a police department, a corporate hierarchy become haunted by the corruption of its past occupants? And if so, as you navigate the modern world, how do you distinguish between a political structure that is operating under a dark, supernatural, spiritual haze versus one that is simply suffering from everyday, mundane human incompetence?
It is a vital, highly complex distinction that requires constant vigilance to discern.
Think back to the beginning of this conversation. We so desperately want to clearly label our political side as divine and the opposing side as an absolute evil.
Right. But when you realize that the entire system, every single seat of power, is a contested cosmic battleground defined by human autonomy, moral character, and unseen spiritual influence, that simple partisan framework completely shatters. The muddy waters of human governance are vastly deeper and far more crowded than we usually want to admit.